Hi, my name is Leslie Murray. Welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover. Today we have Luis Jaramillo. And we're talking about his book, The Witches of El Paso. Luis, sorry, I said Luis. Luis, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about your book.
Ooh, what to tell you? So the book is about two main characters. One is a woman in her 40s. She's a lawyer, a mother, kind of stuck. Another main character is a woman who, in the beginning of the book, is in her 90s. And who's always been able to, she thinks and says, is able to talk to the other side. She's a guide, she calls herself. So we follow these two characters through the present tense story, and then we also follow the second character, the 90-year-old, when she's 18 during World War II era El Paso, when she goes back in time to colonial Mexico. So that's actually when she goes back in time, she things happen. She ends up having a child that she leaves in colonial El Paso. And so in the present tense story, she's trying to convince Marta, the younger woman, to help her find the child she's left behind.
Yeah. Say, like, when I was reading your book, I was like, this is so good. Like, how come not no one, but a lot of people are not talking about it because it's so well written. And the fact that you can like manage the past and the present so succinctly that I've never felt lost when I'm reading this book. I always feel like in place when reading it. I just like, first of all, I was just stunned by that, like the magic of your writing, the magic of your book. And like, I want to talk a little bit, like we'll get into the chunks, but I want to talk about craft because when I read this book, I was like, you are like a master at craft and just weaving all these complexities in the book that I never have to like go back again unless I want to go back again.
Thanks. I mean, I think one thing, so I teach writing, I think a lot about craft. But the thing that I have to do as a writer is that I write a lot and then I cut a lot and then I write a lot more and then I cut a lot more. And it generally takes me a long time to do much of anything, not because I'm a slow writer in terms of producing words, but slow writer because I do so much editing.
Mhm.
And so this book took me about 8 years to write from beginning to end. And, I did want to have, I told you my sort of synopsis of the book, and it does sound complicated, but it's complicated, I think, for a reason, because I did want to bring in family stories. I wanted to write about history. I wanted to write about the border and the magic of the border. And I wanted to write about the feeling of being stuck in middle age and how to get out of that. And then also just the feeling of, in general, of what it's like to feel the urge to be creative in whatever way that is and to not pursue that urge. So there are all these elements that I wanted to include and different time frames. But really the work of the book was editing. So writing and rewriting.
Yeah, I could tell that like you took a long time because it feels like every word is a needle point. It's just like so careful and delicate and just like the way you talk about class in the book. It's so beautiful. Like if you're not like reading in between it, you will miss it. And I like that you can come at all stages of your reading progress or your intellectual life and get something of this book. And that's when I think like art really resonates when you can come into an art and a book and at different spans in your life and get something else, which I think was like, it's just like marvelous. I really love how you put that in the book, like how the border is there but not there, and how people like move in and out of that space. And so, can you talk about like the cultural and the politics of the border in this book, and why is it
Yeah,
important?
yeah, absolutely. So I grew up. So I have a lot of family in El Paso, which is why I set the book there. The main characters are sort of of Nena, the older woman, or of her generation is my grandmother and her sisters essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those stories are in the book. But I grew up in California, and I grew up in Salinas, California, which is a farming town just inland from Monterey. And it's when I was growing up, it was about half Mexican, half white, pretty segregated. Um, but it felt very, very different from El Paso, which may have had about the same kind of, um, ethnic breakup in the population, but just felt completely bicultural.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so much more integration in El Paso. And so it was very fascinating, even as a kid, when I couldn't really articulate this, to go to a place where, for one thing, lots of people looked like me, sounded like me, and where Spanish was such a present thing, just sort of all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've been going back to visit too, I was really struck by that the city of El Paso is so dependent on Juarez and the same thing. So people cross the border very easily, even now, to shop, to go to school, to see family members, to go out. All the reasons you might want to go someplace. People use the border in a very open way. And it was even more open when I was a kid. So when you were driving back, I write about this in the book, but when you were driving back from coming to El Paso, or sorry, from going to Juarez, and you were driving to the United States, you could just say U.S. citizen and drive in without showing any sort of documentation.
Mm-hmm.
So after 9/11, things got a lot tighter, but there's still that feeling of the possibility of going across. And in a physical sense, it's also very easy to cross too. You can just walk across a bridge both ways. And in my grandmother's house, I was just writing about this for an essay, but her house was a block and a half from the border, the one that I grew up going to, but separated by a highway and a fence, and then the river. But because it was so close to the border, women would cross like almost every day and knock on the door asking to iron clothes or to just do something for money. And again, that was something very unlike where I grew up. But yeah, so the physical border, the border between the United States and Mexico, and the symbiotic relationship between the two countries and the two cities is really part of the essential part of the book. And I think one reason why I started to write about magic too, because I wanted to capture that really strange and wonderful feeling of that, sometimes dangerous feeling too. El Paso is one of the most safe cities, one of the safest cities in the United States, and has been for decades. Whereas Juarez is sort of notoriously dangerous because of the traffickers and the gang wars. Yeah.
I want to talk about magic because magic is throughout this book. And I've come from the Caribbean where it's a strong tradition of magic. This is just, I'm like, oh, you're writing about my people, right? We do these kind of things to figure out what's happening or use magic to heal and things like that. And so I'm interested in why, I know why, on a craft level and a story level, but why was it so important to infuse the sense of magic and la vista in the book? What are you trying to tell us, and what are you hoping for us to understand and see and feel?
Well, I think, when you're writing, you often don't know why you're writing something. But I've found most of the time that when I'm writing, I'm also trying to figure something out that's really deeply personal to me and that has really high stakes. And so it took me a while to figure out that one thing I was working on was middle-agedness. How do I deal with being, the majority of the book was written between, I guess, I don't know, ages 43 and 48 or something like that. And, I was going through it kind of, and I didn't know what was happening to me, and it felt weird. And the magic was something that came in unexpectedly. I didn't mean to write about magic, and then it was just there. But once I started to write about it, and I was doing research in the family, I found stories within the family about magic. Then there were a lot of magical kinds of things in El Paso. In the book, I write about going to this market that exists in Juarez that was just full of all these really witchy things,
I love
herbs,
that
but
part.
then also things like skunk skeletons with the black and white tails still attached. I don't think I ever wrote about this in the book, but when I went, I was with some friends of friends, and they were like, "Oh, you should talk to this woman." And
Mm.
we went to go talk to this woman, and she had white hair, these bright, bright, bright blue eyes, and she was standing behind this table. And there's something kind of terrifying about her. And
Mm.
then this water just sort of like dumped behind her all of a sudden, like really. And I was like, no, I'm good. I don't think I need to. Let's just keep walking around the market. Anyhow, so I think the thing that I was, like I said, that I was writing about was being middle aged, or like that feeling of like going from one place to another in life, and
Mm.
how scary that is, and how it does feel so significant as we pass from one stage of life to another. And the thing that I was trying to learn, I think, is like to slow down and pay attention,
Mm.
um, which is sort of my perpetual lesson.
Mm. So I want you to talk about like just like Nena moving from like present day El Paso to the El Paso of the past, because I think that's a beautiful metaphor. But also I want you to talk about like why was it important to write about like El Paso of the past? Because I really appreciate it, because I never like I don't know anything about El Paso, and I felt like wow, I'm really getting to know this culture and these people and like what happened on these lands.
Um, yeah, so when I started the book, I had some very general ideas about what I wanted to do, and the first sort of draft wasn't really a draft, was not what this book ended up being. But once I started to write this draft, the character I was really following is Nena, who's the 90-year-old in the present tense story, and she's 18 in the past tense story when the story starts in El Paso and then goes to colonial Mexico. And so I knew that I wanted to write about history, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do that. Um, but then Nena, one day I woke up, I write in the mornings, and Nena is in colonial Mexico. And then she's in a convent in colonial Mexico. And so I had to do research to figure out what that was and what that may have felt like. Um, but the reason I wanted to write about all that was because some of my family is from that part of the world for 400 years, and
Mm.
I wanted that feeling of things being passed down, so that there's a story about inheritance and about how complicated that history is too. It's not like even the words that we use, like there were like the conquistadors, I suppose, right? And then there were settlers, and some of my family were settlers. What were they settling, right? Who was there before? And everyone was all intermarried eventually, but still, there's like a lot of um, trauma that's in that story. And I
Mm.
wanted to be able to write about the different parts of the story. So I'm glad you picked up on class, because I was interested in that too, not just in present tense El Paso, but also in the El Paso of the 1940s and in colonial El Paso, which the class issue is present throughout all of them. It changes a bit, but there's always a real sense of people with power and people who don't have power.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, because when I'm reading the book now and I'm thinking about El Paso and the people who live there, it makes me think like, oh, these people have such this deep, deep history. They're not like people who just came, right? But I think it contradicts like contemporary American narrative about border crossing and the people who just came and settled there, right? Because it's like, no, these people are of the land, right? And I just love how you're able to do that like so seamlessly.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about immigration because the two things that people think about with El Paso are, I think, are immigration and that Juarez is really dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I was really like trying to not write a stereotypical kind of story about El Paso. So I went there a lot, talked to lots of people, and had spent a significant amount of time there, and was trying to tell this complicated story. But yeah, I think it is interesting that there's are there is a lot of immigration that comes through El Paso, and there has been a lot of immigration. Um, but it's not just like the newest immigration. There have been people sort of passing through for a long time, but there's a difference between the people who pass through and the people who stay.
Yeah.
And I mean, recently I was writing an essay about the people who stay, and now my father and his generation didn't stay.
Mm.
It's like after all these years and years, like now we're on the move again, or some of us are on the move again.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm fascinated by yes, by immigration and by my relatives, but also just the idea of staying rather than feeling like you need to strike out and do something new, or that you have to strike out and do something new.
Yeah. On every layer, it's telling a different story, which I think is really hard to do for a lot of people, to like have all these characters like telling different stories, because sometimes like all of the characters feel like it's in service of one story, and which that could be okay, but like I think when you have all these multiple stories being told, but it's not loud that it's taking over. It just feels, again, I'm going to say succinct, because when I read your book, everything feels so succinct, so seamless. And like,
Um, yeah,
is
go ahead.
that just like, that's just like, you're like, ah, that's embedded in me? Or is that like a craft element that you just learned? Because I'm like,
Well,
how did you do it?
it's reading myself, having other people read it, but I love a book that has lots of different little stories in it, and like so you sort of like go away and you learn something and you come back again to the main story.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of what I was trying to do is get these little things and kind of cram them in. So I don't know if they all fit, but I did want to put a bunch of them in, and then there is a pretty tight little plot in the present tense story that you follow, and I think that kind of keeps up the tension so that you get to the end, and it's holding these other stories, including Nena's, which is its own little. I mean, it's relatively straightforward. She goes to Mexico. She sort of has these various adventures and things happen to her, and then she comes back again. And there's tension in that too. So there's the tension in the story in colonial Mexico, and there's the tension in the present tense story. And because there's tension in both, I think there's a little room to have these other stories tagging along.
Mhm. But one thing I think you did with your story, sorry, this is turning out to me just being like fangirl. I'm like, but you did. One thing you did that I felt that magic, that like thing connects to all of us, right? Just magic in like trying to heal ourselves, magic in terms of like how like, a lot of the non-Western world like communicated with your ancestors. And I think we all want a deep sense of magic in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think which is so beautiful. So I know the book has so many like moving parts, which is beautiful. And I'm wondering like, what are two takeaways or three takeaways you would love readers to to know about this book?
Well, I think along the lines of the magic, I at one point my agent was like, "You need to you need to define La Vista." So I call it La Vista in the book,
Mhm.
and really think about what it is and what it isn't, and have some rules around it. And I finally came down to thinking about it as basically nature, which
Mm.
is not a positive or negative force, but just a force. And there is in it destruction and creation all the time, in cycles, but it just continues. So I especially right now in these times in the United States, I think it's really easy for me to panic. But I am always trying to take the bigger view of things, and I like it when I'm able to. Well, even today I was walking downtown. I'm in New York. You're in New York, but I was walking on the High Line, and I was like thinking about God knows what, nothing good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh man, all these trees and bushes and everything is blooming. There are these teeny little buds everywhere, and I wasn't even paying attention. And to me, that just seems like I think I mentioned it before. Like this is my job. This go around. Like slow down and pay attention to what's happening here. I mean that's really the main thing that I tried to learn from the book as I was writing it. I guess the other thing is that family stories are so important. I just think so much about them and how they shape us as people. And it's really worth it, I think, to investigate the family stories and not take them at face value, but to dig underneath the surface of them to see what's being covered up. Because oftentimes there is something underneath that has to be covered up that people don't want to talk about. That has to do with shame, that has to do with, all sorts of things. Not necessarily all negative, I suppose, but family stories present one version of the family that sometimes is in opposition to the way that we experience the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the same time, there's something that like is very interesting to me in the way the family stories are told, because they become a kind of a myth,
Mm-hmm.
and they're an origin myth, and they're also a kind of lesson about how to be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like everything else, I think it's really worth it to see if to sort of look at them critically and to think about um, how they came into being, and also do we want to behave the way that we were taught to behave? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, I think.
Yeah, and I think for like all these characters, the main characters, they are trying to break that mold. They are trying to break that like box that they have just been slotted into, and create their own. And I think that's like really important.